Hey guys, what I'm about to share with you is both good news and sad news. There is something that most strong players don't reveal to you. It's not every time that we play attacking moves in chess. Sometimes we simply make developing moves to coordinate and position our pieces on their most potential squares. So there are two big things to keep in mind in this case. Number one, developing moves, and number two, tactics or attacking moves. Let's just focus on these two. There is time to play tactics. Speaking of tactics, Grandmaster Susan Polgar once quoted, "Chess is 99% tactics." And that is true. In fact, that's how I win most of my games, and I believe that's how most stronger players beat lower rated players. So let's say you start with E4. The opening stage is like the first 10 moves of the game, and this is where you're supposed to be developing all your pieces, positioning them on their most potential squares before you put your king to safety. Most of the times you may delay castling if you want to, and the other point is you always want to be the first one to strike on the center of the board. For example, black plays pawn to E5. And then you go knight to F3. What are you doing with this piece? First of all, you are developing a piece that was doing nothing at its initial square. And at the same time, you are attacking your opponent's undefended piece. So this is what we mean by developing a piece with tempo. So right now, there are no tactics involved. You are just developing your pieces, positioning them very well. So black has to respond accordingly, defending his pawn. And you see what black is doing here, developing a piece in the way of defending something, which is another great example of developing with tempo. So now as white, what you want to do is to develop your bishop and your other knight, and then later on free up your dark squared bishop, then put your king to safety. And then later on you may involve your queen before connecting your rooks, bringing them on the center of the board. So you play bishop c4, a developing move once again, and black plays knight to f6, a developing move which also attacks your undefended pawn on g5. Question: are there any tactics by this stage of the game so far? The answer is no. We are just developing pieces on their most potential squares, at least where they attack something or where they defend something. Right. Now after knight to f6, say you play knight g5. Hold on. Now after knight to f6, if I was talking to a complete beginner, I would advise him or her to develop the rest of the minor pieces as highlighted, then castle short and play something like queen e2 or queen d2. But having known that most of my viewers are not complete beginners, here I would advise you guys to play something like knight g5. Now wait a second, is this a developing move or a tactical move? Think about it for a second before we move on. Right, so this is not a developing move. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a tactical move because it carries with it some tactics behind this f7 pawn. Remember, you win most of your games through tactics. So this is like the first tactical combination that we have seen on the board, threatening to take on f7. And so black should react accordingly. Now let's say black plays pawn to d5. I can say this is more of a developing move and a defensive move. So there is no much tactics involved. It's a straightforward move. And so let's say you take that pawn, and knowing that this pawn is attacking the knight on c6, black takes. Well, at this point, if you want, you can go right into the fried liver attack, which I believe you guys already know, because with this knight sacrifice, you are double attacking the queen and the rook. But hold on, this is more than a move. Is this a developing move or a tactical move? And I'm just using the word tactical sometimes in place of attacking so that I don't confuse you with a lot of terms. So I see this to be more of a tactical move in that it carries with it the idea of developing the queen to double attack the king and the knight. That's the reason why I think it's more of a tactical move, and you just have to take as black, allowing white to go queen f3 check. And then to defend this knight, black usually plays king e6. But wait a second, this is not the whole idea of this video. What I'm trying to say in this position is, from here, this game is probably going to be full of tactical shots. This game is probably going to involve a lot of tactics along the way, and so both players, especially white, should prepare for many tactical shots and surprises. So certain kinds of positions call for an attacking mind. And the thing is, the player with more tactical ideas or tactical skills, or someone who is good at solving tactics and chess puzzles, is more likely to win this tactical game. So once again, remember, the development of pieces ended somewhere back on move 3 when black played knight to f6. The move knight g5 introduced a tactical game. So if it was a strong player or an advanced player who was playing this game, right at this point, what he is communicating to his opponent is, hey, let's stop playing chess. Let me see how good you are with solving chess tactics and puzzles. That's what he is saying. Instead of the fried liver attack, another line that I would love to discuss is this one, where black plays d5 and then you take, and then after knight takes, instead of going into the fried liver attack, you also have an option to go pawn to d4, which is called the lolly attack. Now wait a second, what do you think about this pawn? Is this a developing move or a tactical move? Think about it for a second. Well, I think this is more of a developing move than a tactical move. Let me explain. First of all, white just developed a pawn which was doing nothing on its initial square. And by developing this pawn, he also developed his dark squared bishop indirectly defending the knight. And this pawn is literally attacking nothing at the moment. Not much of a stretch, because the e5 pawn is well defended by the knight, right? So this is more of a developing move if you think about it. But after e takes d4, it's not good to go into the fried liver attack because your king is exposed. You don't have an e-pawn. So in this case, if you exercise a bit of patience, you would be able to see this tactic. When something looks too good to be true, never rush to make a move. Always pause, find time to think why a certain position looks too good. So in this case, the right move is just to castle short, a developing move by the way, putting your king to safety if you still want to maintain an advantage as white. If black plays the top played move bishop e7 in this position, this is when you can now safely take on f7, sacrificing your knight, because now there is no check, your king is safe. And now this is not a developing move, it's more of a tactical move, because if black takes, now you can simply go queen f3 check, double attacking two things, the knight and the king. This time king e6 doesn't work due to rook e1 check. Remember, the e-file is open, and if knight e5 is played, blocking the check and also attacking the queen, well, you can simply go bishop f4, and things are already bad here. There is literally nothing that black can do to save the game. By the way, bishop f4 was more of a developing move. How do I know this? Because it was doing nothing on c1, and this was the first time we moved this bishop, though it came with an attack. So there are no unusual tactics involved behind these, but it was just a developing move. After bishop f6, adding more support to this knight, what I would call a tactical move in this position is something like knight c3. Yes, this is the first time this piece has been developed, and we can say this move is both a developing move and a tactical move, but more of a tactical move. Why? Because it creates a direct contact on this square, and that's my main emphasis, you guys. The thing is, if black takes, looking at this position from an expert's point of view, even rook takes e5 check becomes possible, because after bishop takes, now I have rook e1 reinforcing. This knight is pinned, this bishop is pinned, and there is no any other good way of defending this position. For example, if queen f6 or queen d6, well, now this knight becomes unprotected. I can go queen takes d5 check, and after king e7, only sensible move. Now I go rook takes e5 check, say king f8. Now I see that there is no immediate way to checkmate my opponent, because all these squares are covered by black's pieces, and queen c5 doesn't just make a lot of sense. And so what I would play in this position is another tactical shot, a tactical move, bishop g5. How is this a tactical move? Because it creates a direct attack on black's queen on the enemy's piece. Tactically speaking, now I can simply checkmate black like this. Two things: developing moves and tactical shots or tactical combinations. Development and tactics. So since we already seem to know what piece development is, what are tactical moves? How do we identify tactical shots? Or when do we play tactics? So tactical moves are those moves that you or your opponent plays to create direct contacts between your pieces and your opponent's pieces. In other words, when your pieces and your enemy's pieces come in contact, for example, e4, e5, this is not a tactical move because there is no real contact between these two pieces. These pawns can't capture each other. Equally, knight f3, knight c6, there's nothing tactical here. White just developed a piece with an attack and black just developed a piece by defending this pawn. So nothing tactical is happening behind this. Bishop c4, again, this bishop is targeting a pawn that is defended once, so no much tactics here. Knight f6, knight g5, now tactics begin because there is direct contact between white's pieces and black's pieces. In this case, the f7 pawn is about to die. So after pawn to d5, this is more of a defensive move and a developing move because it's straightforward to play this. So if white takes and knight takes f7 may be considered to be a tactical move as it creates direct contact between white's pieces and black's pieces. That's a direct threat, and another characteristic of a tactical move is one that carries with it a stream of other upcoming attacks. For example, you can see that this is more of a positional sacrifice inviting the move queen f3. That's why it qualifies to be called a tactical move. So think of a tactical shot or a tactical move as a move that comes with some hidden roots, some hidden attacking follow-ups, and these can be categorized under three kinds of sacrifices. Number one, positional sacrifices like this. Number two, clearance sacrifices, which I covered in the video that has popped up in the card above. And interception, where you sacrifice your own pawn or your own piece in order to block some lines that your opponent wanted to take advantage of. So you sacrifice your own piece in order to create a roadblock for your opponent so that they don't continue with their attack. The interception tactic. Now the next phase of this video is going to be more interesting, you guys. Watch. So here I have three good examples of positional sacrifice, clearance sacrifice, and the concept of interception, which most strong players use to identify tactics. Right, let's start with the concept of interception, or simply what others call the interference tactic. I want you guys to look at this position very well. Take a second. I know most of you guys started by counting the material, like how many pieces does white have and how many pieces does black have. You know what? All those things don't even matter. For example, this rook and this knight is out of the game. Equally, white's rook and the bishop are out of the game. So if I were you, I'll start calculating from here. Now I want you to begin from here and find the best continuation for white. There's only one best move, by the way, so let's go. Take your time. Right, time for the answer. So any advanced player in this position would be thinking of mating black on f7. But now the only problem is this queen, which is guarding this square. And this is where a true master would think of these three tactical principles that I just mentioned, you guys. Number one, is there any clearance sacrifice here where I can sacrifice my own piece to open up some lines for my other pieces? If there is no clearance sacrifice, he is going to ask himself the second question. Is there any positional sacrifice that I can make whereby I sacrifice a bigger piece in order to emerge with a better position? If that has no answer, he would then think of the interception concept or the interference tactic. Is it possible for me to sacrifice my piece in order to cut some lines, in order to close certain lines that my opponent is eyeballing to stop me from checkmating? And you have to be very careful because these principles are closely related to each other. They are very similar in nature, but it doesn't even matter if you know what to do. So in this case, what I would use here is the concept of interception or the interference tactical shot. And the move that I see in this position is Rook E7. What? Guys, this type of a sacrifice where you block your enemy's view or where you obstruct your enemy from eyeing the square that you need the most is called interference in chess, or the concept of interception, or simply the obstruction tactical shot. The thing is, the game is now over. Now it is possible for us to go Queen F7 checkmate. For example, if black takes with a bishop, now Queen F7 checkmate becomes a possibility. What if black takes with the queen, for example? Well, we can't go Queen F7 check, but we have Queen D5 check, and on the next move, we are going to mate either on E6 or on F7. Bingo! So that's one example of the interference concept, but not really a positional sacrifice where you sacrifice material in order to emerge with a better position, or a clearance sacrifice where you open up some lines for your other pieces. Here you just want to mate on F7. It's clear, and the best way is to obstruct your enemy's piece from guarding this square. Here we have another beautiful example to explain the concept of interception. Black is coming this side and white is going that side. In this position, it's white to play, and it looks like white is automatically losing because black is not only ahead in development, but he also has a passed pawn. Now find the best continuation for white, or the only winning move. Let's go. Right, so you all know that the idea is to promote this pawn into a queen, but we can't do that just yet because of rook takes f8. But there is one more tactical shot that we can try in this position in order to promote our pawn, and this tactic is called interception, or simply interference, whatever you can call it, even obstruction, it doesn't even matter. So in this case, we use our light squared bishop to obstruct black's rook, and now this will become easier for us to promote. Black is not gonna take, not to mention that black doesn't even have any meaningful checks after you play bishop e8. If they play bishop h for just an example, that's a useless check because you can simply go king f1. You don't want to go into, the line of attack, so you want to go king f1. Even if they play knight h2 or knight e3 check, worse off you can just go king e2. f3 doesn't make sense because you can just take that pawn, not even the knight, and nothing will stop you from promoting. But say, Kaspa, what if black plays bishop f4? After all, there was this move even at the beginning. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, introduces another tactical principle called a clearance sacrifice. In this case, this pawn move promoting into a queen is more than a clearance sacrifice, also paved way for this open check. For example, here we are looking at one good illustration of a possible clearance sacrifice. In this case, forget about how many pieces are on the board. It's white to play, so I want you to find the best move for white in this position that demonstrates what a clearance sacrifice is. Let's go. Right, so in this case, a clearance sacrifice is when you voluntarily let your opponent get a material advantage. This is when you sacrifice a piece in order to get it out of the way. For example, we really want our queen to sit on g7 in order to checkmate black. So if you were looking at the move rook g8 check, I propose that you watch this video again to understand these things very well. Whenever your pieces are in contact with your enemy's pieces, take your time to think and make the right move. Don't just rush to make a move. If you play rook g8, it's not only one piece that black has which can capture on g8. Black can simply take with the rook, and now you can't mate on g7. You can't even take this. I mean, this is just too bad. Black is going to win. So the move in this position, instead of rook g8, is rook h7 check. So again, it's not just a matter of remembering what a clearance sacrifice is, but also finding a right way to sacrifice material, a right way to initiate a clearance sacrifice or an interception. So in this case, rook h7 check wins, because whatever black does, it doesn't even matter. For example, knight takes h7. Now you can simply go queen g7 checkmate. And it's not just in checkmate situations where we use these kinds of principles, you guys. One other good example that shows how powerful clearance sacrifices can be are the opening lines that we play in the Tennyson Gambit. I'm just trying to make a point, by the way, for the sake of my new friends who are watching. You love the Tennyson Gambit, right? So we start with knight to f3 and then black plays pawn to d5. Have you ever asked yourself why we play pawn to e4? I'm not saying this is the perfect opening in the world. I'm just trying to make a point so that you understand the reasoning behind some of these gambits. So what we are trying to do with these kinds of sacrifices is that we are trying to clear or open some lines for our other pieces. For example, after d takes e4, now you go knight g5 as if you want to take back this, right? And then after knight to f6, what do? You temporarily sacrifice another pawn so that if black takes, they can help you to open up some other lines for your other pieces, to attack. So bishop takes, now you have a clear plan. You just cleared the way for your last squad bishop and your knight to coordinate well. After h6, wait a second, you all know this knight sacrifice, which is knight takes f7, where you double attack the queen and rook. What do we call this kind of sacrifice? Is it a clearance sacrifice or an interception? Listen, this can't be an interception or an obstruction because there's nothing that you are obstructing here. You're not obstructing your enemy's piece from guarding a certain square. No. This might be a good example of a positional sacrifice where you sacrifice a bigger piece or some material in exchange for a favorable position. For example, in this case, we know that if king takes, we now go bishop g6 check, cutting this line so that the king doesn't go back, and on the next move, we simply win black's queen on d8 like this. So we positionally sacrificed our knight in order to achieve this. But what if black doesn't take your knight? What if black doesn't accept your positional sacrifice? Well and good. The thing is, they can play something like queen d5 here, right? Also attacking this pawn. So the way I would see this is in the lines of a clearance sacrifice. What I want to do here is to take the rook and temporarily give this pawn a blind eye. So what I'm doing is I'm asking black to take this free pawn as well. And I can call this a clearance sacrifice because by giving up this pawn, I just managed to clear another way for my bishop, just like that. Sometimes others would call this a deflection in chess. So those are some of the other principles to keep in mind. There's deflection, decoys. So this is also some kind of a deflection to deflect our enemy's queen from guarding an important square. Another example of a clearance sacrifice in the Alpine Gambit against the French defense, where white starts with e4 and then after e6, you simply go pawn to d4, and after d5, you don't take or advance, but you simply go bishop e3, allowing black to take your pawn, because by doing so, you are allowing yourself to be ahead in development, paving way for your other pieces, and this turns out to be a great way of playing against certain openings like the French, because next move is you're going to play pawn to c3 as per theory and start developing all your pieces based on the misplaced pawn of an enemy. We sacrificed a pawn to open up other lines. For example, b6 here may be played, you play pawn to g3, and after bishop b7, you go bishop g2, see how this attack is coming, c5, and then you go knight e2, so that if black takes, you take back with either your knight or your bishop, say knight bd7, and then you play queen c2. Now you have more attackers attacking this pawn which you sacrificed, and this is all because you sacrificed a pawn to open up some other lines. So this can be some sort of another example to try and explain what a clearance sacrifice is. So here is another good example that can help us explain what a clearance sacrifice is. Take a look at this position. It's white to play, and having seen that there is direct contact between your pieces and your enemy's pieces, what are you supposed to do first? Again, you have to pause, be patient, and calculate through to find the best possible move. So I want you guys to do the same and find the best continuation here for white before I disclose the answer. Let's go. Right, so there's only one best clear and sacrifice in this position that would enable us to checkmate our opponent in 3 moves. So the first thing I saw in this position was Queen h7 checkmate. But there are only 2 obstructions that are stopping us from achieving our dream. The first obstruction is Black's knight on f6, which is guarding the h7 square. And the second obstruction is our knight on e4, which is also obstructing our queen. So what do? We first of all sacrifice our knight, which is blocking our queen's vision. So knight takes f6 check. And now Black notices that you want to checkmate on h7. So they go knight takes f6, guarding this h7 square again. So what do you do again? This is now when you sacrifice your second piece. Again, there's nothing to memorize here. These things just come natural when you practice more of these chess puzzles. This is check, and there's nothing that Black can do here. Be it bishop takes or pawn takes, whatever, you will just checkmate them on h7 like this, thanks to your clear and sacrifices that you played in order to achieve your dream. So that's a good example of a clear and sacrifice. Again, I'm not asking you to memorize these. I just want to reveal to you what advanced players see on the board in certain positions, because most of these positions are so relatable, you guys. And now we move on to the last important principle of positional sacrifice. Let's go. Many chess players can sense when to make a tactical sacrifice, like a clear and sacrifice and an interception, as in giving up a piece to deliver a checkmate or something like that. But mastering the positional sacrifice, where you sacrifice material for a long-term positional edge, that's what really separates good players from great players, you guys. And that's what Magnus is really good at, more than all of you guys who are watching right now. So a positional sacrifice implies giving away material for long-term positional advantages, such as exchange operations. We see one common positional sacrifice that happens in the 3 knights opening after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, and then bishop c5. This is a very common opening mistake that most people run into. But do you know that in this position, there is one common positional sacrifice that many people are not even aware of? You know that as long as you don't have a bishop on c4, the best move here is knight takes e5. Why sacrificing your knight? Well, the thing is, after knight takes, you have pawn to d4, and it's just a matter of time before you get back your piece. Theory states Black doesn't have to take the pawn with the bishop, because this would just make you become ahead in development while attacking this knight, right? If pawn to d6, for example, you have bishop d2, and you will be the first one to secure your king, begin attacking. Besides, this knight can't even move because you can easily take on g7, and Black is in real trouble. But all this was possible because of this positional sacrifice that most people don't even know. We see another positional sacrifice in the so-called Halloween Gambit. Just an example, you start with e4, then Black plays e5, you go knight to f3, knight c6, and then you go knight c3, the 3 knights opening again, then Black plays knight to f6, known as the 4 knights game. The idea is that you want to positionally sacrifice your knight on e5 so that after knight takes, you can simply go pawn to d4, and then you begin chasing those knights like this. If knight e5, for example, you have pawn to a4. Say knight g6 is played, you go pawn to e5. If knight g8, here you can even play pawn to d6 if you want. There's nothing much that Black can do here. In no time, you will simply play queen e2 check and win back some material. So the whole idea was to open up some lines after sacrificing that piece positionally. Again, I'm not saying this is the best opening in the world, but it's just something to use for illustration. One example of a positional sacrifice, guys, is the famous Greek gift sacrifice. Let me explain. So here you have a bishop and you're looking for a quick way to expose your opponent's king in order to checkmate him. So the first thing that comes into your mind in this position is bishop takes h7. This usually happens in the Stonewall attack and also in the London system. Agreed? Yes. And it is such sacrifices that we refer to as positional sacrifices. You just sacrificed a piece in order to emerge with a positional advantage. Speaking of this kind of a sacrifice, it can't be a clearance sacrifice because there were no lines that were obstructing your pieces. This is just a normal piece sacrifice aimed at creating some attacking opportunities. This cannot be a deflection, and it's not even an interception because your enemy didn't have any other bigger piece that was stopping you from capturing on h7. So after king takes, you now have a possibility to attack with your knight. And next, you might even checkmate your opponent after queen h5 and queen h7 checkmate. So that's one example of a positional sacrifice. Here is another game that was played by Fischer. The opening doesn't really matter. I just want you guys to see where he applied that positional sacrifice principle, which I've been preaching about all this time. So bishop d3 was played. Already we can see this positional sacrifice coming, the so-called Greek gift. His opponent played knight bc6, and this was the last chance to survive. h6 was desperately needed in light of the following continuation. Bishop takes, Greek gift sacrifice. In the real sense, we call this kind of a sacrifice a positional sacrifice, where you sacrifice a bigger piece in exchange for a smaller piece so that in return you may emerge with a better pawn structure or a better position. If king g8, Fischer would have played queen h5 and then mate on h7, something like that. So Fischer's opponent here played king g6, and then there was many ways to end the game, one of which was h5, and if king h6, the easiest was to play knight takes e6, discovery check, and on the next move go on to win the game. This is all for today's study, you guys. I don't want to bore you to death, feeding you more and more stuff that you will easily forget. So as you play in your games, always think about these 3 important principles that most strong players don't want you to know. Number 1, clearance sacrifice. Number 2, positional sacrifice. Number 3, interception or interference. And remember how you identify when to play tactics. It's when there's real contact or direct contact between your pieces and your enemy's pieces. That's when you begin thinking of tactical shots. Are there any tactics that I can play in this position? Do I have any clearance sacrifices to surprise my opponent? Do I have any positional sacrifice so that I can have a better position? Do I have an interception or an obstruction or sacrifice to deliberately sacrifice my piece and gain entry to another square? These are not the only principles, though there are so many of them. Look out for studies on decoys, blockades, strategic sacrifices, desperado sacrifices, etc. So at the end of the day, a person like Magnus Carlsen or Hikaru usually think of these sacrifices most of the times whenever they are playing a game. Your opening stage may be equal, but the middle game will separate great players from average players. Right, so I hope you learned 1 or 2 things. I'm also glad that I shared these things with you. For starters, just think of these 3 principles whenever you're playing the game of chess. Right, so hope to see you soon in my next video. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye bye.